Welcome to the Backyard Professor Responds videos. The other day, I received word information that Brian Hales, one of the Latter-day Saint apologists for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, has written a new article for the Interpreter Foundation, run by Daniel C. Peterson as sort of a Mormon scholarship journal to defend the faith, because apparently it really does need help in its sagging credibility. And so the apologists are attempting to bolster that credibility and help maintain faith within the system. And Brian Hales literally has said that the chariots may not have had wheels in the Book of Mormon, and that horses are tapirs. And so we've been discussing this a little bit, and I want to share just a couple of the ideas on our message board that we have been sharing various themes and ideas with. And I want to talk about this, and I will show it to you. Let me get on my screen here. Here's what Brian Hales says. The point is right here in the article, the dark, bold, underlined. The point of the article is that if horses, equus caballus, existed among the Book of Mormon peoples, they did not use them as virtually all other developing civilizations use them. They didn't help in war or with transportation or in other ways. This is important for determining the size of the Book of Mormon promised land. More importantly, it shows that critics have overstated their case when they say or imply that DNA evidence proves the Book of Mormon is not historical. Thanks, Brian Hales. So this person says, are you saying that perhaps horses didn't exist among the Book of Mormon peoples? If so, and archaeology backs the lack of horses during the Book of Mormon times, why does the Book of Mormon mention horses? A very good question. Was God a bad communicator? And if they did exist and were something other than what we today consider as horses, why call these animals horses? Again, is it a question of God not communicating well? He supposedly inspired Joseph Smith through the seer stone to write down the words that became the Book of Mormon, so perhaps God wasn't up to speed in the days when horses were mentioned. The word horse came out of the seer stone to be communicated to a 19th century audience and beyond, an audience that was a particular meaning attached to the word horse, and so one would assume that a God would mean what he said through the seer stone. Or perhaps he didn't bother to correct what was translated, letting us continue to move in darkness. As for DNA, how is the lack of DNA from 600 BC Israel being overstated? Is it that critics don't grant the 1 trillion or lower chance that DNA will someday support Book of Mormon claims? Very powerful questions. And Brian Hales, again, this is Shulam talking to Brian Hales. The point of the article is that if horses existed among the Book of Mormon peoples, they did not use them as virtually all other developing civilizations used them. Shulam asks, what do you mean if? Joseph Smith, or scratch that, Nephi listed some basic farm animals spotted to have existed when first exploring the forests. These animals were known to the Jews, Nephi, in 600 BC, and could be called by no other name other than what they were. And we have the Book of Mormon list of cow, ox, ass, horse, goat, wild goat. The text states that the first explorers came into contact with animals in which they were familiar. They called them by name. A horse is a horse, of course, and by no other name is a horse given in the Book of Mormon other than horse. So there is that consideration. Well, perhaps maybe the chariots were pulled by the goats, the cattle, and the pigs that also previously existed. It'd keep with the theme of using domesticated animals differently than everybody else did, as well as differently than what the text plainly suggests. I mean, if it's good enough for Dane Ironfoot. Book of Mormon Hebrews were a pretty wild bunch, eating pigs and horses while riding about on their thoroughbred tapirs. In other words, We're hoping that you get the point that this is being quite ridiculous. And then again, this is a problem apologists never seem to answer. If words in the Book of Mormon mean something different than how the 19th century people used them or how we use them today, why the confusion? Why would a supposed supreme being like the Mormon God allow this confusion? Is he a bad communicator? When he is at dinner with his harem, if he asks to pass the butter, did he really mean pass the bread? A succinct question. And thus, how can any of the words of the Book of Mormon be taken at face value today if some of them don't mean what they obviously mean and have meant for centuries? That's the other issue. Now, maybe sure, they could have chariots and wagons pulled by all manner of animals in the Book of Mormon, of course, that's granted. But the chariot is special, and Joseph Smith's knowledge of the chariot was certainly grounded in his understanding of how they were employed in the Bible. Now, listen to what Brian Hales is saying in his article. He says, chariots with wheels are not described in the Book of Mormon. No, not explicitly. It's assumed that people would understand the chariots have wheels, but not according to Brian Hales. John Sorensen explains scholars have long operated on the assumption that the wheel was unknown in ancient American technology, so assuming Lamoni's chariots had wheels may not be justified. And that is Brian Hales' quote. That's amazing. Hales says that wheels would assist in moving, but are not implicit in the definitions. And to make his point, he quotes something from the Oxford Dictionary in an attempt to convey how a vehicle or a receptacle is not necessarily dependent on wheels. And this is utter hogwash. All we need to do is refer to the same dictionary that Joseph Smith was familiar with, and also remind everyone that Smith was well versed about the use of chariots in the Bible. The Webster's English 1828 dictionary, chariot, a noun, a half coach, a chariot with 4 wheels and 1 seat behind, used for convenience and pleasure, or a car or a vehicle used formerly in war, drawn by 2 or more horses and conveying 2 men each. These vehicles were sometimes armed with hooks or scythes. Chariot, the verb transitive, to convey in a chariot. Maybe the chariots were pulled by pigs that also obviously existed. So here's a picture of the Nephite battle pig. Now they're just having fun with it. Or maybe there's a battle rhino. This is the Nephite battle rhino circa 289 AD. I mean, if they're going to make up any words to any meaning, then why not? And that's a pretty cool idea, you see. And then I wanted to go to this page here. And I want to share this idea here where I said, Brian Hales said wheels for chariots would assist in moving, but are not implicit in the definitions. And I was so shocked by this that I said, howling laughter. Let me guess. Hale isn't peer reviewed by anyone in his camp either. And then I put a bunch of laughing, smiling faces. This is literally over the top stupid. I can't even. I mean, were I this man's father, I would blush in shame for him making such a statement like this. Now, here's the thing. Yeah, there's a horse with sled, but that's not going to cut it. So, no distances, according to Hales, in the Promised Land required months or years to traverse. In other words, the hill Cumorah in New York State, where Moroni buried the plates, cannot be classed within the blessed territory of the Promised Land, 200 by 400 miles, because that land, according to Hales and Peterson, are located down south near the Banana Republics. Do you hear that, Brian? The silliness of your logic is truly ridiculous. Where is the promised land, Brian? At least the Heartlanders understand the spirit and the doctrine, God bless the USA, of the Book of Mormon. The Mesoamerican apologists are deniers in thinking the promised land is down in Mexico. Second Nephi or Third Nephi 20:22 says, "And behold, this people will I establish in this land unto the fulfilling of the covenant which I made with my father Jacob, and it shall be a new Jerusalem, and the powers of heaven shall be in the midst of this people, and even I will be in the midst." And then Third Nephi 21, "If they will repent and hearken unto my words and harden not their hearts, I will establish my church among them. This land is for their inheritance. It shall be called a new Jerusalem, the city built on this land. And those who are scattered upon all the face of the land shall be unto the new Jerusalem." Moroni envisioned the New Jerusalem being in America, and it was established by Joseph Smith and the Latter-day Saint Church. He recognized how the Jaredites and Nephites inherited the same land of promise inhabited by Joseph Smith and the gold plates. Moroni said, "Behold, Ether saw the days of Christ, and he spake concerning a new Jerusalem upon this land." What land? The land in which Joseph lived and where the gold plates were buried. That is the promised land of the Book of Mormon. What part of that do you not understand, Brian? That's a very excellent point, quite frankly. And then I followed up, and did not Joseph Smith himself declare the Adamondiaman the New Jerusalem? And where's its location? Well, it's in Missouri, not Mesoamerica. So do any Mesoamericanists actually believe what Joseph Smith himself established by revelation from Jesus Christ? Just who are the apostates now anyway? It's amazing. Now, another gentleman responded to me and he said, "This is far beyond stupid. It's mendacious." Here is Brian Hales' entire quote. Here is how he gets this idea. One definition for chariot in the Oxford Dictionary specifies a stately vehicle for the conveyance of people, and vehicle is defined as a receptacle in which anything is placed in order to be moved. Wheels would assist in moving, but are not implicit in the definitions. So let's parse the language carefully. One definition for chariot, he says. That's a red flag because Brian Hales is cherry picking. He says one definition, so there are many other definitions. In the Oxford Dictionary, okay, so one of the several definitions in the same dictionary, this means a guaranteed cherry picking is going on with Brian Hales. Which dictionaries? Check the footnote. Always check the footnote. The footnote Hales used is the compact edition of the Oxford English Dictionary, complete text reproduced micrographically, 2 volumes, 1971. And what exactly is the compact edition of the Oxford English Dictionary in 1971? It's a reprint of the second edition of the OED from 1933. Now, that's not an unreasonable choice. The OED is an excellent English dictionary, maybe the best English dictionary. And Chariot has been around for a long time, and we have no reason to suspect that it's changed much in meaning. However, one of the strengths of the dictionary is the historical information as well as the detailed etymologies of words. And they go into the hundreds of thousands of etymologies, cross references, millions of quotations, etc. More than 100 years in the making. It is the world's greatest dictionary. But given that wealth of information, why does Brian Hales limit himself to one part of the definition of chariot from that dictionary? In particular, what are the odds that none of the other definitions in that dictionary define chariot without using the word wheel? Well, about zero. Just Google the word chariot, and I did do this. Chariots were invented as far back as 4000 BC, and they have always been described as having wheels being pulled by animals. Always. There was no exception that I can find. I looked up several dozen different articles, dictionary entrees, etc. Wheels belong with chariots, Brian Hales. You're being so hypersensitive critical that it's got to be embarrassing for a grown intelligent man of your caliber to come up with this kind of utterly stupid argument in order to get rid of an obvious anachronism in the Book of Mormon. So this is dishonest pseudo scholarship, this kind of a cherry picking. So, did the author pore through the dictionary, most likely to include some definition of chariot that does not include the word wheel, and pick that definition in order to help out the Book of Mormon? Probably, because all the other definitions absolutely use wheel. But the chicancery continues. Note the last sentence of Brian Hales' quote. Wheels would assist in moving, but are not implicit in the definitions. Okay. Technically, you're true. You're starting to sound a lot like Daniel C. Peterson being the word game player he is, however, because the vast majority of definitions of chariot explicitly refer to wheels, not implicit, explicit. Or does Brian mean they are not implicit in the definitions that I cherry picked? Now we're getting to the rub here. Any other evidence for wheelless anything's called chariots anywhere? Not in the paper. Just dishonest dictionary cherry picking. That method sucks. That means your research, Brian Hales, sucks. You better get up to snuff, would be my honest advice. So, just another one of many examples of why the Interpreter is a vanity publication and not a scholarly journal. And the single most important lesson I've learned from any Interpreter article is to always check the footnotes. Always, always. And then here we go. I wanted to get to this part that is so important that, again, Shulam makes. On this idea of the wheel not being implicit in the definitions in the Book of Mormon, being hypercritical, of course. The only dictionary Smith would have been concerned with is the one which he had been on his own bookcase. A possible example of that was given on chariot from the Webster's Dictionary of 1828. Then, of course, there is the Bible, and Joseph Smith heavily depended on this as well. Exodus 14:25 talks about took off their chariot wheels that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord is fighting against the Egyptians. Judges 5:28 says, the mother of Sisera looked out at a window and cried through the lattice, why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the wheels of his chariots? 1 Kings 7:33, and the work of the wheels was like the work of a chariot wheel, their axle trees and their naves and their felloes and their spokes were all molten. Now, I would also like to point out there are numerous examples in the Bible that show chariots and horses being inseparable, in which a chariot can do nothing of itself. It must be pulled by a horse, of course. Now, the remarkably interesting thing here that I really think is most significant is this comment. This is all true about the biblical chariots with wheels. Now, here's the issue. From the apologist's perspective, what would the ancient Jews mean by chariot at the time the word was recorded on the metal plates for the Book of Mormon? The Old Testament examples are spot on because that's the culture the Nephites came from. So they knew chariots were wheeled. So they simply assumed by stating, yes, the chariots, that the wheels were there. My idea is that it's very similar to us today. We say, yes, I got in the car and went to the store. I don't have to mention the wheels of an automobile for anyone to know that it has wheels, or I used my bike to get there. I don't have to specifically mention the wheels. It is understood that way. So this sort of amazing, really inane apologetic arguments trying to save the Book of Mormon is really remarkable that such intelligent men continue on pushing this stuff when no one else accepts it except those who already were born and raised to believe the Book of Mormon is true anyway. The evidence, the anachronisms, the lack of archaeology, and the complete lack of the scientific DNA is more than enough. When you have anachronisms, the story is fake. And I think the example John DeLynn gave in one of his podcasts is extremely important here. If you were to find an old photograph with Abraham Lincoln, and he had the photograph where he was looking and talking on his iPhone while he was typing on his computer, and through the window out the back of his room, you could see his 1967 step-side Ford pickup, you would know the photograph is fake. And you say, well, if we eliminated a couple of those anachronisms, then it would be closer to being true. But you only need one anachronism to know it's fake. All you would need is the iPhone, or all you would need is the photograph with him at a computer typing, and you would know the photograph is fake. It's the same thing with the Book of Mormon. Steve Smoot puts together a really weird Book of Mormon defense with Zelph on a Shelf that was just, or no, Murph. It was with Murph, I'm sorry, I believe. And he said, well, of the 197 anachronisms that the Book of Mormon is known to have, through the years, we have now whittled it down to where it's only 63 or something like that. We've eliminated half of the anachronisms, and Smoot presents that as if that's progress toward the book being true. I would dare prophesy in the name of Jesus Christ here and now that were Smoot to present that for his PhD thesis, he would never be able to acquire his PhD thesis from any university on this planet, because your whole logic is just wrong. I challenge you, Stephen Smoot, present that information to your PhD folks who are helping you acquire your PhD as kind of an aside, as seriously as you present it on the YouTube, as if the day is coming where the Book of Mormon will be seen to be a true book of Scripture, and use that logic, use that argument of, well, it used to be 100 and some odd anachronisms, and through further archaeological discoveries and linguistic research, etc., we have now whittled those anachronisms down to a few dozen. And so we're making progress. The Book of Mormon could potentially be true. I dare you present that idea with that book and all your so-called archaeological discoveries, of which I can state uncategorically there has not even been one made of any Nephite or Lamanite genuine artifact, because there's none in the museums. The Lamanites and Nephites haven't even been discovered yet to be valid real people like the ancient Jews of the Bar Kokhba documents have. You have to first have on the earth ground real people, Lamanites and Nephites. You don't even have step one. And here you're claiming that dozens and dozens of archaeological evidences have now shown that the Book of Mormon is not so bad, that it's actually becoming more true. Why don't you put your money where your mouth is then and present that to the actual archaeologists and scholars who are not believers and convince them? Otherwise, you're accomplishing nothing. So thanks for watching my Backyard Professor Responds videos. I'll be back with a whole bunch more soon.